Okay, I will get started. Now we're a couple of minutes after the hour, but there'll be a bit of intro. So hopefully the time we're in full swing, people will have joined. So today we'll talk about how and why it's important to start thinking about getting credit, and if you are getting credit and recognition for method development. So method development is a huge part of all research disciplines, but has, I think, been underappreciated for a while. Hopefully you see the slides on the one large slide on my screen with the title slide there today. I think that's what you should be able to see. Hopefully that's good. I will just go through a little bit of housekeeping. Perfect, you do, thank you. So as you know, I've just started the recording, so this webinar will be recorded. Everybody who has registered will receive an email with a link to the recording and also to the slides, so don't worry too much about any of the links about articles or other things that you maybe want to grab. You will be able to get them afterwards from sorry, just muting things bibbing through on my phone. You'll be able to access them afterwards from the email that will come to you later on. There is a Q&A and a chat here. I will have lots of time. I'll probably talk for a little over half an hour. There'll be a Q&A at the end, but if you feel free to add questions as they occur to you, either in the Q&A box linked from the Zoom control panel, ideally there rather than chat, but you can also pop them in chat and I'll try and keep an eye. If I spot them while I'm talking and it's relevant, I'll try and address them then and there. Oh, you can see a block. Okay, that's one of the Zoom. I had the panelist things. Is that better? Perfect. Oh, glad. Thank you for telling me that. You never quite know when you're on two monitors if things are blocking or not. So that's perfect. And there's some links here just to other webinars and also demos. So if you wanted to, if you're using protocols.io, but you would like a more tailored kind of, I have questions I want to ask you, then you can arrange a demo for yourself so that you can ask questions one-to-one with a member of the protocols.io team. We have people on different time zones, so make sure you check time zone if you sign up for one of those to be sure that you're getting it on your time zone rather than something in the wrong time of day. Here's a little bit of an agenda of what we are going to go through. So a bit of a look at how method sharing has changed in the last century. And then, you know, the value of public sharing and how you can get credit for reproducible and discoverable protocols on protocols.io, but also beyond in other places. It's not, there's not just protocols.io. Obviously, my webinar today will focus on that because that's where I am working. But really, it's important to think about how you can improve reliability and impact of your research papers. And you can do that by turning protocols into peer-reviewed papers. And as I said, lots of time for Q&A. So we will start with this little kind of look back at how method sharing has changed in the last century. If we go back not that far, slightly shy of 20 years, the journal Nature Methods, probably the first methods journal, was launched in 2004. So not actually all that long ago. And the excerpt you can see here is from the inaugural editorial in that journal. The founding editors stated that their goal was to create a highly visible forum for the presentation of novel methods, because major methodological developments take their roots in the cross-fertilization of different disciplines. By contrast to this, the normal way we're communicating methods is just in that materials and methods sections of journal articles. And so those are sometimes, you know, they're useful for targeted peer groups, but generally don't give technical information the wide exposure that's needed to move more towards interdisciplinary exchanges. And frankly, that couple of paragraph narrative, materials and methods, is generally very incomplete. So it is not very helpful for replication or truly understanding the details, precise details of what was done in that experiment. And I've got a great example of an interdisciplinary success story later on that is via method sharing. But behind the scenes, this here is Veronique Kierma. So she was the founding editor of Nature Methods, and now for some time has been the chief scientific officer at PLOS. And what we learned from her is that back when Nature Methods was launched, there was a lot of skepticism, even in Nature Publishing Group, around the launch of that journal, because they thought they published research and that nobody would be interested in just sharing methods, just publishing the methods. And they actually were concerned that this might dilute their brand and it would be impossible to fill a journal's pages with just methods and so on. As we all know, Nature Methods was and still is a huge thriving success. And so they kind of opened the door really to the consideration of the value of methods. But it is very interesting to think back about that skepticism of whether methods merited independent credit, which was just less than 20 years ago. And we did an interview in a podcast with Veronique. So there's a link here to that if anyone does want to find a little bit more out about that later on. So what's happened since then? Quite a lot has happened since then. If we look in the last 10 years, there's more and more methods-focused journals that publish protocols and methods. So here is just some examples. It's not exhaustive. Big publishers like Springer Nature continue to expand their portfolio of method-centered journals like Nature Protocols 2 years after they launched Nature Methods. Also Protocol Exchange and Elsevier launched Star Protocols and Methods X, sorry. But there's also other independent initiatives like Jove, which is Journal of Visualized Experiments, Bioprotocols, and others. So we're in a place now where journals, funders, and many researchers have realized that it isn't just code and data that we should be sharing, but in the 90s and noughties kind of started to move away from contact authors for code and data to seeing the need to share those things in specialized data and code repositories. Lots and lots of places for those things: GitHub, Dryad, Figshare, Open Science Framework, and of course much more specialist repositories. Data availability statements started to be commonplace in many journals after the PLOS policy was implemented in 2014. But methods are playing catch up. However, sharing them is starting to be the norm. And I think the realization that they deserve credit and recognition as a standalone output has become much more appreciated. So you now have more choices on where and how to communicate those methods. Okay, this may be a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's an indicator of where research is going as well. So another more recent shift in terms of research and how it's being performed and the value of methods in that research process is the emergence of registered reports. So this is a kind of new process, but not that new now, but it has been a big change in the process for how research in many disciplines is being carried out. So a timeline here shows how their implementation went from conception in 2012 to being now, accepted in over 200 journals in 2019. I'm sure this number is a lot higher now. So if you haven't come across registered reports before, I'm going to explain briefly how they work. So I've nabbed some of these images from Center for Open Science, where they do a lot of work around registered reports. And the previous slide, there's a nice review that you can go to if you're interested in more. So basically, for a register report, there's 2 stages that are submitted separately. The first stage is a proposal of the research question, what the authors intend to investigate, and the approach they'll take to investigate the question. So it has a fully fleshed out study design, methods, and protocols proposal. And this proposal at stage 1 also details the research question and why it's important, justifying, the value of that research question. This is submitted and peer reviewed. And if a journal considers that study relevant, agrees it's got a good methodological approach proposed that will answer or go some way towards answering the research question, they'll check if it's sufficiently powered, uses the right techniques, etc. Then that study will receive from the journal an in-principle acceptance. What that means is that the authors have the go-ahead to go off and perform the study, collect the data, analyze, interpret, and they write that up as stage 2. That then is more of a typical kind of pre-registered research article, essentially same format as a research article, but the question and methods have been pre-registered. So that's where the in principle acceptance of the stage 1 submission means they have a pre-approved acceptance for this stage 2, regardless of what the results were from the study, as long as they more or less followed what was proposed in the stage 1 submission. They can make some tweaks to the protocol and methods, but they have to be tracked and justified. And if everything checks out when the stage 2 submission is reviewed, which is a light touch review just to make sure everything is done appropriately, then the journal will publish the article without reconsidering the significance of the results or the question. So this is pretty cool because it emphasizes the value and importance of the research question. Oh, sorry, I've jumped ahead. The value importance of the research question, and critically the quality of the methods and approach that's being taken by the researchers. So it's essentially removes any issues of researchers trying to prove a hypothesis to generate, what they consider to be positive results, because the study's accepted regardless of outcome. So that really helps research to stay true to itself. So you get high quality protocols, method. Protocols.io is a great place for this, because if there are changes, you can make a new version, and that will then be peer reviewed, and the changes will be trackable very easily on the platform. Okay, we will move on now to give you some insights into how you can use protocols.io for public sharing and getting credit for reproducible and discoverable protocols on protocols.io. So as I alluded to earlier, we have lots of different research outputs, and we have been accommodating the sharing of quite a few of those for some time. The most well recognized in the center is the research article, but we now appreciate more the value of code and data. Citations are an important element, but last but definitely not least are the methods. In fact, the methods are really the linchpin to reuse and add ongoing value to all of the other items here, because it's really hard to interpret anything unless you know how it was done. So my example of the value and need for the methods here is an image I found in a magazine where someone had made a variety of tiny tweaks to one single cookie recipe. So you can see that if these cookies are your data and results from those recipe tweaks, those tiny tweaks result in phenotypically very different cookies. So scientifically, we can only understand those changes, those phenotypic differences, if we have a knowledge and insight into what the methodological tweaks were that were used to generate each different cookie. So in short, you have to know the method alongside the data to fully understand what happened and why. And I think, that's not been appreciated. It's curious. We've shared a lot of data and have not put anywhere near the same value on methods, but people are starting to catch up with that now. Okay, so that's where protocols.io comes in. We have a very simple method to make it easy to share method details before, during, and after publication. Hopefully you've some familiarity, but if you haven't, this is a good place to start. The URL on the bottom right here takes you to this welcome page. There are well over 14,000 published protocols that are discoverable on there in protocols.io as an open access repository. So they all have a Creative Commons CC BY license. So they're free to read, use, reuse. It's free to create an account and publish protocols on the protocols.io repository. There's also a lot of private content. I've got over 59,000 now private protocols. They've been created by users who are creating, optimizing, developing with their colleagues. And that's really the business model of protocols.io, is institutions pay for licenses to allow their researchers to have more of that private space. But in theory, even with a limited number of free protocols, private protocols, as long as you publish them, you can continue to use the platform for free. But back to the openly available ones, on the platform as a repository with all of its publicly available content, About 1 million people come to the repository to read, access, use the public protocols every year, those protocols that have been shared. And most of those protocols aren't actually tied to a specific peer-reviewed paper. They just sit on protocols.io, but are independently discoverable via search engines or in places where they're indexed, like Crossref, Google Scholar. And they'll appear on a researcher's ORCID profile if you've linked it up. So these published protocols are independent of a peer-reviewed article, already really valuable and useful as a research output that can allow for researchers to get credit for them. I'll show you later, you can have a citation for your protocol in the same way you have a journal citation. However, they also tie very nicely in to a modular publishing approach with journals as well. So I'll get onto that in a little bit. But about 60% of our traffic comes from Google searches. So people are just organically landing on the protocols when they're looking for a methodological approach. Geographically, about 30% comes from the US, I think about 30% from Europe, and then the rest is dispersed all around. So it's very, very global. And when you come to protocols.io, so this is the public repository side, you can search the public content, look for things that might be useful in your lab. Maybe you don't want to start from scratch developing a protocol, but you know another lab has shared one and that you might be able to adapt it. So if you can find their protocol on protocols.io, you can create your own fork of that, which means you will have your own editable private version of someone else's published protocol. So you can tweak that for the equipment you have in your lab, or for a different cell type or organ or whatever it is that you're working on, which will save you a lot of time and energy because you don't have to start from scratch. Those researchers will see the reuses happen too, especially if you go on to publish it. They'll know that someone has been able to adapt, reuse and publish a version of their protocol, which is great too. There are a lot of open communities which you might want to have a look into, because you can access the people in those communities, join those workspaces. So here's just a coronavirus method develop one up as an example that might help you. They are very tailored, so there are some for very specific, research disciplines, and you can go in and communicate with the people, interact and see what discussions are happening around some of those protocols. And I mentioned earlier, there's a great example of an interdisciplinary connection made by sharing methods. So this is that. On the top left was a tweet from a researcher in Chile who was looking for RNA extraction specific experiment from primary cortical neuron cultures, so from some brain cells. After a while, a postdoc from UCSF tweeted a reply pointing to a protocol on protocols.io. When you look closely at that protocol, it's tied in and linked to from a paper that was published in GigaScience, but that paper was focused on a 3-spine stickleback parasite, so a fish parasite. So it seems very unlikely that these researchers would have found that research article as a likely location for the research method that they were looking for, without that method having been shared as a completely separate research output that was also therefore independently discoverable. So you can start to see and appreciate those benefits of sharing the methods independently from the peer-reviewed article as a standalone unit that's discoverable in and of itself. So how do we do this? How can we make, nice, independent, reproducible research articles? So this is a small movie that I'm gonna hopefully click and get to play. Oh, hang on, let's go back. I think I need to go switch and click it over here. So this is accessible on the platform. It's a protocol on how to make a protocol, a good protocol. So you add an abstract to that, and before start information, put a nice title, make sure that you add a nice thumbnail picture that may be indicative of results you'll get or something. You can make sure you share that protocol when you publish it to relevant workspaces. Ensure you add keywords, including acronyms and spelled out terms so that they increase visibility. Make full use of the components for the variables in the protocol, add all of the reagents and equipment that you're using. That will make things much more reproducible for others too. If you're bioinformatics-y or software, you can make use of specific things for that. Movies and videos and pictures can really help. You can show the setup, you can put how-to little videos, ensure the protocols are runnable. So when you do an experiment, you can make sure it's very concise and clear with single step-by-step instructions. Make it instructive rather than a long narrative. If you have repeat steps, put them all in, because if you run through, then you can tick them off one by one. Be concise, be instructive, use active and not passive, include durations and so on. And you can divide up into sections the protocols for different parts of the experiments that you're doing to make it easy to navigate through. Also go ahead and include lots of the other information. You can, if you just kind of click through, you'll be prompted to add guidelines, safety, etc., etc. So this is a nice way of running through and just checking how you can set up and make the protocol nicely reproducible. And we've got some lovely examples from researchers who've made a lot of use of protocols.io, reporting that sharing and publishing their detailed protocols has directly led to an increase in the number of collaborations they've established, as other researchers have found those protocols and found them through the content that they've published on protocols.io. So this is Luciano Martellotto. I probably said that wrong. And he has told us that, probably about 80% of his recent collaborations have been a direct result of sharing protocols publicly on protocols.io. He recently moved and took this professor position up in Australia, and so it's probably been directly impactful in his career also. Before I go on to talk about the interactions with publishers, it's really important to note that since we launched in 2014, and now with well over 14,000 published protocols, we have never come across a case of a publisher saying, oh, you shared the protocol on protocols.io, so we won't look at your paper and peer review your paper. We have never, ever had that happen, or not that we're aware of. So as best we're aware, all journals will be very happy to receive papers in which you've shared full details of your methods on protocols.io. If anything, it's a benefit because it increases likelihood of that paper being reproducible, the research being reproducible. So we would always encourage people to share publicly as soon as protocols are ready. And from the publishing perspective, sharing gives methods additional visibility, as well as enabling you to engage with people who are using the method, maybe not have completely shared research interests, but who are using that method in different applications. And of course, it's a central place you can iterate, share corrections and optimizations easily, and guide everyone naturally to new versions. I'll show you how that looks in a minute. And it doesn't preclude further recognition by publishing, as we see. So that's going to take me to the next part of the agenda, looking at how you can improve the reliability and impact of your research papers by either including a call out to your protocols on protocols.io, or by taking protocols you have got already but haven't really published before and turning them into peer-reviewed methods. So first, a very quick glance at how easy it is to publish a protocol on protocols.io. At the click of a button, you enter a 6-step process where you do get prompted to fill in some information, because we do need to gather some minimal fields to ensure they're kind of complete before we publish. So, for example, you will be prompted to add an abstract if you haven't already. And then if you're somewhere with a premium license, where your institution pays for a premium license, or you have one through some other means, your protocol will immediately be published by the time you finish that 6-step process. If you don't have a premium license, then your protocol will enter a screening stage, because we do check them before proceeding, just really simply to weed out spam. We do see quite a lot of that. We don't want to be publishing those. I think spammers finding protocols.io is kind of an indicator of success, but it's something that we have to be very careful about, trying to stay on top of and not letting those get through. So the screening process, we say, may take up to 2 days, but in reality, it's almost always done same day or next day, outside of weekends and holidays, just and you'll get an email like the one shown here as soon as it's actually been approved and click published. If you're not ready to make your protocol immediately available, but you do want to put a DOI in a research manuscript that you're submitting for peer review, you can use the reserve DOI option. So that lets you know what the DOI will be. You can pop it in the manuscript, but also give you a private link for editors and reviewers so they can access the protocol until the manuscript's accepted and you're ready to come back and complete the publish process. We would always recommend you just publish straight away because it saves the step of having to come back. And as I said before, it doesn't harm the manuscript's consideration at the journal. So this is how it can look in a published research article. And you can do this at many, many, many journals. Just show an example of PLOS Biology here, where in the materials and methods section, you can see the authors have said that methods and protocols for all of the experiments are available as a collection in protocols.io, and then they have the DOI link. And when you click that DOI link, you're brought to protocols.io. And this example, you can see that you're immediately told, oh, actually, there's a newer version of this collection. And do you want to see the newer version? So if you click to see the newer version, it will bring you to the latest version. So what this means is that since these authors published that paper, they have made some updates to at least one of the protocols in their collection and updated, therefore, the whole collection. We call this dynamic permanence, though, because that DOI link in the paper will always bring you to the same static saved version where the protocol is as it was at the time they published. But the authors can come in and make clarifications or changes. They can further optimize. That protocol is a really dynamic object, but the history will always be maintained with different versions. You can see version 1 and then version 2. So it's a great way, if you do spot a mistake in your method, to correct it without having to go back and get a formal correction at the journal. I can see someone's popped in the chat that they're a little confused if protocols.io is like a journal can publish new methods or just a window to present your methods in a published manuscript in an easy way. It's not like a journal, but it's like a preprint server. So you can go ahead and post and get a DOI for your method, but it's not peer reviewed. So it's a bit like posting a preprint of your methods, and then you can include that in a journal article where it will be peer reviewed. So we don't currently have any way to peer review on the platform. We just do a screen to weed out kind of pseudoscience and spam, etc. But that DOI link that you get means you can put it into your research articles, which means that paper will have a link to fully comprehensive methods details, much, much nicer presented and tailored for methods than you would get if you just wrote a narrative text in a standard research article materials and methods section. I hope that's clarified a little bit. This next thing that I will talk to you about, though, is a tailored way in which you can put your method on protocols.io and have it go into a journal article that's very tailored to presenting a new method on protocols.io. So we have a close relationship with PLOS One. They launched a new article type called Lab Protocols back in 2020. When was it? 2021. And that they require in this lab article type for the methods to be on protocols.io as a significant part of the article. And it allows authors to publish their methods. So if you do now have a protocol on protocols.io that isn't associated with a research article, but you would like it to be, you could submit it very easily as one of these PLOS One research article papers. They do require additional parts to the manuscript, abstract context, a bit of an introduction and relevance and so on. But then it can be peer reviewed as a lab protocol article type on PLOS One. When it's published, you can see that article on PLOS One has a prominent link to see the protocol. It's also included in the materials and methods. So in this very minimal case, really all of the methods are on protocols.io. So if you click, you'll be taken to protocols.io. On protocols.io, we can add a peer-reviewed method badge to make it clear that that method has actually been peer-reviewed, and that +1 will link you back to the article. So they're really nicely bidirectionally linked. And as noted, they're not always, even though it's called lab protocol, they don't have to be lab research. In fact, this very first one that was published was about a visualization method for archaeological results. So it's very versatile. So just to clarify, there's another movie here that I'll just click going while I talk. Getting into peer-reviewed and published as a protocol article, you don't have to publish with +1. This is just a place where we've developed this partnership, but there's loads of other journals that allow you to publish methods and techniques. You know your fields on your audiences and appropriate journals, but +1's very broad and welcoming journal. And one of the reasons we're really excited about the partnership is because of the way they defined the scope, is that they're not expecting new experimental results. They're welcome to new protocols that might be extensions of something already reported. And the idea is that if you published already a method or someone else did it, but your work has been to troubleshoot or optimize it for maybe for new conditions, this work of optimizing or tweaking can be recognized as valuable and important in and of itself. So this means researchers who develop methods can get credit. Might be that a student spends a long time, maybe even years, developing and optimizing a method, but doesn't then get the opportunity to apply the method in generating novel research results. So they can still get credit. And it just really allows you to kind of be recognized for the method development in and of itself. There's quite a few of these have been published now. We've had some lovely feedback from some of the authors of these lab protocol papers that I'm showing here. Monica, her protocol on wastewater quantitation and isolation was covered in the New York Times. So she told us that it made her famous with her small Latin American community. Jacopo, I'm going to show you a little bit more from him in a minute. He was the one who published that one I just showed you. It was the first lab protocol, but he was super excited because it was his first solo and first author paper. And Simon Joe this was his first paper as a senior author. So we've done spotlight interviews with some of these authors, which are really nice to watch too. So here is the more from Jacopo. This is a snippet from the interview that we had with him, which I will play through. It starts out with Lenny, my boss, chatting, and then it goes on to Jacopo talking about how it's been important and impactful for him. So I'll let that play.
Hindsight, now that you've started the postdoc, when you look back in terms of the significance of the lab protocol for your career development, and just looking back, hopefully you're not regretting doing this. Like, how do you feel it fit into your PhD and into the postdoc transition and the reception of the lab protocol paper from your perspective?
I'm extremely proud of it. One of the things I'm really happy about is that, of course, it aided me in the completion of my PhD and me getting a PhD. It's one of the things that, in my specific case, my PhD reviewers were really happy about and were really impressed by. So that's a point of honor for myself. But at the same time, I'm really happy of having it done for my own personal PhD, because it sort of gave a methodological section to it. While, especially in anthropology, is usually research project centered. So a context, a time period, a culture, being able to also develop a method and including a more technical aspect to it, I thought it complemented that really well. And although my PhD was specific to a time period and a region, I managed to add this methodological aspect that sort of went past those boundaries. Another really good thing that I think this protocol has done for my career is the recognition it gave me. As Lenny, you were saying, at first it kind of blew up. Many people started following along and were interested and got in touch with me. I was lucky enough to have been invited to lectures and practical sessions at various universities. And for just a standard, quite niche archaeological method, I think the article right now, after a year, has 4 citations in it, and I've heard of people that are putting together the manuscripts and they've been using it as well, and that's something that I'm very proud of, and I think it has helped my career quite a lot.
So it's really nice actually to see this, and there's some of the, like this, I mentioned the spotlights, they're really lovely kind of insights into how the value of sharing methods and what that meant for the different researchers. So I thoroughly recommend looking up the spotlight interviews if you get a chance and you're interested in kind of thinking more about how to publishing methods might be useful for you. And I mentioned, you know, no publisher or journals ever, we've never heard of them saying, you published it on protocols.io, so we're not going to publish your paper. And at this point, we've reached out to many publishers because there's a push for reproducibility. There's well over 500 journals, some open access, some subscription. And if you look carefully into their instructions for authors, not always something that people do, but if you do go and look in their submission guidelines, you'll see that they actually suggest including a link to the detailed protocols on protocols.io. So don't think it's going to be harmful. It's probably actually going to enhance what the editors and reviewers think of your paper. So here's some lovely examples of papers that are published and the journals promoting deposition of the methods and protocols on protocols.io. So this is lovely kind of modular publishing that embraces open research. We've started seeing more and more where the papers maybe the centerpiece with the story, but you also have data in some specific repository, perhaps NCBI or SF or other appropriate location. The code might be on GitHub, and we're starting to see more and more of the methods independently going into a repository like protocols.io. So this also allows, which perhaps isn't always appreciated, distinct author lists for each research output. So maybe the paper, the person who generated the data, perhaps the first author of that paper, might be very different from the person who really developed, optimized, made the method work. And this means the method can have its own distinct author list too, which allows for credit for the appropriate parts of the research project going to the right people. We're definitely seeing trends in scholarly publishing to move away from a vague narrative method section towards much more rigorous, more reproducible method reporting. Finally, just to note, I mentioned it earlier that, you know, the protocols all have their own DOI when you publish them, but they also all have their own citation too. So there will be, if it's included below that, will be the manuscript citation if relevant, if there's a peer-reviewed manuscript that corresponds. But the citation, this is under the metadata tab in protocols.io, you will always be able to access that. And it's very easy to download that to import into your reference management software like Mendeley or EndNote, Zotero, wherever you're using. And then so whenever appropriate, you can cite both method and research article distinctly, depending on the context of what part of that research prior work you're actually making use of. And all of our content is really stored securely and all very carefully backed up in exactly the same way that publishers are held accountable to do this. They all keep content backed up in an entity called clocks, which is controlled, lots of copies, keeps stuff safe, which means that if ever anything were to happen to us, we have archive mirrored versions of our published content on that platform. But we also have gone further and have an archive with CZI, the Chan-Zuckerberg Initiative, to capture all of the dynamic content that wouldn't go to clocks. So the commenting and the versioning and all of those links and things are captured on that mirrored effort. There's all of this other dynamic functionality. This just shows you that you have the protocol citation and manuscript citation too, as I just mentioned. And I think what we have on protocols.io is a way to track the reuse, which isn't very easy to see for other research outputs beyond just citations. So we have lots and lots of options. So when you click on the metrics tab of a published protocol, you can actually see all of these different kinds of ways that a protocol has been used, how many views, actual exports of the protocol itself, how many people have bookmarked the protocol, maybe if it's getting a lot of use, how many people have made forks, both public or private, of that, so have thought it worthwhile to make a copy of that protocol for reuse, and the number of comments on the protocol and run records and so on. We also have, under the forks tab, you can visualize the versions and also any public forks that have been subsequently published and versions of those. So you can see this one has had 6 public forks, also 79 private forks. So people have been making a lot of copies of this protocol. You can actually open this all out and see all of that in a kind of visualized way. It's a really lovely way to see the reuse and value of a method. So if you're looking to kind of report on impact of things you've generated, this can be a really nice way of doing that. Second to last thing I'll mention before I stop is that although we're all very familiar with supplementary files and documents in papers, there's really a good push for a number of years now to moving away from supplements. So, you know, some journals might say you could put methods in the supplementary information. It is not recommended for many reasons. They are enumerated and talked about really nicely in this article in The Scientist. So recommend having a look if you want to find out more about that. And finally, just to reiterate all of the various different but all equally important benefits of sharing and publishing your methods on protocols.io, and how this can be beneficial both to your immediate collaborators and others who might want to access all of the details of your methods. But really, and most importantly, why it's important to you to be able to receive credit for all of your research methods. So this as your important research output that you've generated as a part of your research process. And that brings me to the final part, which is Q&A. So I will welcome any questions that you have. I don't see any in the Q&A just now, but you can pop them in the Q&A or the chat, and I will gladly answer them. So I'll just give you a moment to type any in. If you don't have any, feel free to drop off now, but I will stop the recording and we can go on to do the Q&A.